The stranger in the rearview mirror, it all began on a Tuesday. Not the kind of Tuesday that makes history, just the kind that feels like an echo of the last one. Sundar Pichai was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that creeps into your soul after too many boardrooms, too many numbers, and too many days of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. He was in Houston for a quiet tech conference, the kind where people pretend to talk about innovation, but mostly just talk about stocks and quarterly earnings. Sundar had planned to fly out that night, but a last-minute meeting ran long. His driver had already left. It was raining. He didn't want the Google team scrambling to arrange another ride, so he did what most people do. He opened an app and ordered an Uber. The car that pulled up was an old Toyota Camry, clearly from another era. It had that lived-in look. Slightly scratched doors, a dashboard decorated with small faded figurines, and a gentle hum that didn't sound factory standard. Sundar opened the door, sat in the back seat, and nodded politely to the driver. The man was older, maybe in his late 60s. Skin the color of burnt caramel, wrinkles deep like riverbeds on his cheeks, and hair that had long since given up the battle with time. He wore a simple blue jacket and looked like someone's grandfather. "You Sundar?" the man asked with a calm, almost melodic voice. Sundar nodded. "Yes. Airport, please." And with that, the car rolled forward, quiet, but determined, like it knew something Sundar didn't. For the first few minutes, they drove in silence. The city passed by in streaks of light and rain. Sundar looked out the window, his mind swimming with thoughts, problems at work, his son's science fair next week, the ever-growing expectations on his shoulders. But something about the driver's eyes, the way he checked the mirror occasionally, not out of suspicion but almost curiosity, made Sundar speak. "You've been driving long?" he asked. The driver chuckled. "You mean tonight or in general?" Sundar smiled faintly. "In general." "Well," the man said, turning down the radio, "I started driving when gas was 29 cents a gallon. But Uber? That's a newer gig. Been doing this a few years. Pays the bills. Keeps me moving. I like meeting people." "Do you ever get tired?" Sundar asked, surprised by his own question. The driver took a moment before answering. "Tired of driving? Nah. Tired of what life throws sometimes. But then again, life's always throwing something. Better to catch it than get hit in the face." Sundar laughed softly. "That's true. You're a thoughtful one," the driver said, glancing in the mirror. "Most people just stare at their phones. You thinking about something heavy?" "Always," Sundar replied without thinking. "That's kind of the job." "What do you do, if you don't mind me asking?" Sundar hesitated. People usually recognized him. It wasn't arrogance, it was just the reality of his position. But this man clearly didn't. Or if he did, he didn't care. It was refreshing. "I work in tech," Sundar said, keeping it vague. "Ah," the driver nodded. "Computers and such. My son did something like that. He was the smart one." Sundar caught the past tense. "Was?" The driver was quiet for a moment. "He passed a few years back. Car accident. Wrong place, wrong time. He was on his way to visit me. Haven't touched a computer since." The car went silent again. The rain outside grew louder. "I'm sorry," Sundar said softly. "Don't be," the driver replied. "It's life. Doesn't ask you if you're ready." They drove a little longer in silence. Then Sundar, still staring out the window, said, "You know, I used to think the higher you climb, the easier it gets. Turns out the air up there is thinner, and the falls are harder." The driver smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who's been climbing a long time." Sundar looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "What did you do before driving?" The man paused, then said simply, "I was an engineer." Sundar leaned forward. "What kind of engineer?" "The space kind." And that's when the air changed. Not just in the car, but in Sundar's chest. Something clicked, like an unseen door opening. "You worked in aerospace?" "NASA," the driver replied, his voice calm but proud. 35 years. Worked on shuttle propulsion systems, orbital navigation, a bit of everything. I retired after Columbia. Sundar sat back, stunned. This man, this humble, quiet Uber driver, had once touched the stars. Why are you driving now? Sundar asked, baffled. The man laughed softly, like the answer was obvious. Because I still like to move forward. Doesn't matter what the vehicle is, a rocket, a car, a life, as long as it moves. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was sacred. I never got to finish my final project, the man added after a while. A propulsion model that could have changed the fuel ratio in low orbit, but budget cuts, politics, you know how it goes. Sundar's mind was racing. 1,000 thoughts at once. This wasn't just a retired engineer. This was someone whose brilliance had been lost in the noise of bureaucracy and forgotten headlines, and now he was driving strangers to airports, and yet there was no bitterness in his voice, only peace. They pulled into the airport entrance. The rain had stopped. Sundar sat still for a moment. "What's your name?" he asked. The driver turned around, eyes twinkling. "Leon." Sundar reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and handed it over. "Leon," he said, "I think we need to finish your project." Leon looked at the card, blinked slowly, then looked back up, and for the first time, recognition sparked in his eyes. But Sundar was already out of the car, walking toward the terminal. The rain beginning again, this time lighter, almost like a whisper from the universe. In the rearview mirror, Leon stared at the card, and it simply read, Sundar Pichai, Alphabet. Inky sat there, rain tapping gently on the windshield, not moving, not speaking, just feeling. Then he whispered, "Well, I'll be damned." And in that moment, the story really began. The propulsion of second chances, Leon didn't drive another rider that night. He sat in the parking lot near the airport, engine off, card still in hand. The name on it buzzed like a secret finally, whispered aloud. He hadn't recognized Sundar at first, just another polite man in a nice shirt with tired eyes. But now he realized he'd just driven the CEO of Alphabet Inc., a man who steered one of the most powerful engines in the modern world. Yet it was the way Sundar listened, how he sat quietly, how he saw him. That stayed with Leon more than the name on the card. Most people don't look back once they reach orbit. Sundar did. 3 days passed. Leon didn't expect a call. He figured the card was a kind gesture, the way people say let's do lunch and mean goodbye forever. Still, he kept the card in his shirt pocket like a small token of possibility, even if it seemed foolish. And then, on the 4th day, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was efficient, professional, and slightly amused. "Mr. Leon, Mr. Pichai would like to invite you to Mountain View, all expenses covered. He says it's about a project you once mentioned, a propulsion model, he believes." Leon dropped his coffee. A week later, he was on a flight to California, his first in years. The plane hummed beneath him, and for the first time since his retirement, he felt connected to the sky again. Not just flying through it, but toward something that had waited patiently for him to stop surviving and start dreaming again. When he arrived at the Google campus, Leon was overwhelmed, not by the buildings or the technology, but by how different everything felt. People on scooters, robots delivering snacks, engineers debating over whiteboards like modern-day poets. And yet, among all this, he didn't feel out of place. He felt called. Sundar met him personally. No assistants, no cameras, just 2 men on a bench under a tree. Sundar asked him to explain the propulsion idea again, this time with detail. Leon spoke slowly, his voice thick with emotion and rust, explaining a concept born decades ago in a cramped lab, half math, half madness. A new kind of fuel ratio optimization that could allow satellites to adjust orbit using far less energy. Back then, it had been dismissed, too experimental, too ahead of its time. But Sundar didn't blink. He leaned forward like a student hearing a legend for the first time. "We can build this," Sundar said, his voice soft but firm. Leon chuckled. "What do you mean, we?" You run a company with more data than God. Sundar smiled. And maybe God wants us to use some of it for good. Over the next month, Leon was given a desk, a team, access to research labs, younger engineers who looked at him the way people look at living museums, half awe, half curiosity. At first, Leon was shy, uncertain. He had to relearn the software, the language of the present. But as the weeks went on, something inside him reawakened. His mind, long dormant under the weight of grief and routine, lit up like a forgotten launchpad. But the work wasn't easy. The model, though brilliant, hit wall after wall. Simulations failed. Tests overheated. Some engineers began to doubt. Even Sundar faced pressure from investors who didn't see why a retired NASA engineer was worth the cost. A vanity project, someone whispered in a meeting, not knowing Leon was within earshot. That night, Leon didn't go home. He sat in the lab alone, staring at equations he'd written decades ago, wondering if he'd made a mistake by believing again. Sundar found him there at 3 a.m., still scribbling on a digital tablet. "They don't get it," Leon said, not looking up. "They don't understand how close we are." "They don't need to," Sundar replied. "Only we do." There was something in Sundar's voice, quiet fire. Not the kind that burns out, but the kind that burns through. And Leon, for the first time in years, felt safe enough to trust it. A breakthrough came 2 weeks later, during a seemingly unrelated project involving drone navigation. A young intern named Maya noticed something in the propulsion drift pattern, a tiny imbalance that matched an old flaw Leon had documented in a notebook he thought he'd lost. The moment was electric. Minds collided, data danced, the engine design shifted. Sundar watched as Leon and Maya argued over fuel ratios like an old jazz duo finding their rhythm. It was beautiful. It was real. But then came the call, an old friend from Leon's past, someone he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. The voice was urgent, broken. "Leon, it's about your grandson." And just like that, everything shifted. The next day, Leon was gone. No note, no explanation, only a half-finished model left behind and an empty chair that suddenly felt too heavy to look at. Sundar sat in the lab staring at the notes Leon left. They made no sense without him. Too brilliant, too layered. He felt the weight of something slipping away, not just a project, but a man who had just begun to live again. A week passed. No word. Then Sundar got a letter. It was handwritten, shaky. "But careful, I'm sorry I left. Family comes first, always. The work we did and it matters. Don't stop, finish it. You know how, you always did. And tell Maya she was the smartest one in the room. I was just lucky to catch her spark before it lit the world." No signature, just a small drawing of a rocket. And underneath the words, "Forward is forward." Sundar held the letter for a long time, and then he whispered to no one, "We're not done, Leon." Echoes from the launch pad. The lab felt hollow without Leon. The coffee mugs were still on the counter. The dry erase board was still filled with half-erased equations that only he could explain properly. But the chair he used to sink into, that deep, creaky one by the window, sat like a memorial, untouched. It was a strange thing, Sundar thought, how absence could be louder than presence. At first, everyone assumed Leon would return. Maybe he just needed a few days to handle a family emergency. Maybe he'd walk through the doors, smiling sheepishly, ready to dive back in with some wild new insight that no one else had considered. But as the days turned into weeks, hope slowly dimmed, and silence took its place. The model, the propulsion project, sat incomplete. Too complex to finish, too brilliant to abandon. Maya, the intern who had uncovered the drift correction, stayed late most nights. She was young, sharp, and carried herself with a quiet intensity. But even she admitted that there were pieces of Leon's design that felt like riddles wrapped in metaphors. "He thought in stories," she once said to Sundar. "He built physics like poetry. That's hard to reverse engineer." Still, Sundar wasn't ready to let go. He began spending more time in the lab, flipping through Leon's notebooks, scanning every page for patterns, annotations, anything that might hint at what was missing. He found odd sketches, hand-drawn spirals that seemed more emotional than technical. Notes in the margins that referenced old songs, constellations, even childhood memories. Leon hadn't just been building an engine, he had been threading together a lifetime of thinking. But then a surprise arrived, a package, unmarked, no return address, hand-delivered to Sundar's office by a courier who didn't wait around. Inside was a small square metal box and a folded piece of paper. The paper said, in Leon's scratchy handwriting, "You'll need this if you want to finish what we started. Don't just read it, listen to it. It's all in the timing." Sundar opened the box carefully and found something unexpected, a cassette tape. Old, dusty, clearly untouched for decades. There was also a USB stick labeled converted version. Curiosity tangled with caution as Sundar played the audio. It began with static. Then a soft voice, Leon's voice, clearer and younger, speaking with the quiet urgency of a man working in secret. "This recording is for my son, Jared. If you're hearing this, it means I never got to finish explaining. The model works. The energy curve stabilizes only when you account for emotional response." Yes, emotional. I know that sounds mad, but human intention changes behavior even in machines when you're dealing with sensitive navigation systems. We built engines that responded better when the operator believed they would succeed, like they could sense it. It's not just science, it's belief. Trust the data, but never forget the heart. Sundar sat back, stunned. What Leon had been working on wasn't just propulsion. It was responsive propulsion. A system that could subtly adjust based on the confidence of its user, using biometric data, eye tracking, heart rate, even voice. A machine that aligned itself with human intent. No wonder it had failed in simulations. It wasn't built for robots. It was built for people. The implications were massive, revolutionary, and terrifying. It also meant one thing. They needed Leon back. Maya listened to the recording, eyes wide. "So you're saying the engine works better if the pilot believes in it? Not just better," Sundar said. "It works because they believe." But why had Leon hidden this? Why had he only recorded it for his son? And why send it now? The answer came a few days later in a news article buried deep in a local Texas outlet. Sundar was up at 2 in the morning, restless, researching old NASA documents when he stumbled on it by accident. The headline read, "Local boy genius returns to hometown after coma. Grandfather identified as former NASA engineer." The photo beneath showed a teenage boy, pale but smiling, holding a drawing of a rocket with the words, "Forward," is forward underneath, and standing next to him, hand on his shoulder, was Leon. Sundar stared at the image. Leon had left because his grandson, believed to be unresponsive for years, had woken up. And in that moment, Sundar understood everything. The project, the cassette, the note to Maya. It wasn't just about finishing the model. It was about handing down hope. Leon wasn't trying to complete his legacy. He was trying to share it. "We have to go to him," Maya said, already packing her bag. Sundar nodded. "But we don't go as executives. We go as students." Leon had started something extraordinary, something that bridged science and faith, logic and love. But now the next phase wasn't in Silicon Valley. It was in a quiet town in Texas where a grandfather and a boy were rediscovering life together. As the plane touched down in Houston, Sundar looked out the window. He wasn't just chasing innovation anymore. He was chasing a man who had taught him that sometimes the most powerful propulsion doesn't come from engines. It comes from second chances. The man who lit the stars, the sky over Marlin, Texas, wasn't famous for anything. It didn't blaze with the neon promise of a city skyline or sparkle with desert mystique. It just stretched, wide and honest. When Sundar and Maya stepped out of the rental car, it was that stretch of sky that made them pause. Not because it was beautiful, but because it reminded them of how small they were and how far they'd come just to ask an old man a question the world had already stopped asking. Leon's house sat at the edge of town, modest and unassuming. A chipped mailbox, wind chimes made from old satellite parts, and a wooden ramp that had clearly been built in a hurry. It looked like a place where life had not been easy, but where it had persisted anyway. They didn't ring the bell. Maya just knocked once, twice, and then the door opened. Not fully, just a crack. And there he was. Leon looked older. His eyes, still sharp, held something heavier now. Not suspicion, not fear. Just time. Time that had passed too fast in some places, and too slow in others. He didn't speak right away, didn't ask what they were doing there, didn't look surprised. Instead, he looked at Maya, then at Sundar, and then simply stepped aside. "He's out back," Leon said. "Go slow. He startles easy." They followed him through the house, past worn photographs and a table cluttered with machine parts that looked suspiciously recent. On the back porch sat a boy, 15, maybe 16. Thin frame, short hair, and eyes that blinked too often, like he was trying to keep reality from slipping away. He was drawing, not with crayons or pencils, but with a soldering pen on a scrap of copper plate. Fine lines, circuit pathways, a design, language beyond his years. Leon stood behind him, one hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Eli, my grandson." Eli looked up. His eyes met Sundar's for half a second, then darted away. "He doesn't talk much," Leon said, almost apologetically, "but he listens, watches, and lately, he's been building things." Maya stepped closer, not intrusively, just gently. "That's a propulsion diagram," she whispered. Leon nodded. "I never showed it to him." There was a silence after, that long, meaningful, thick with something unspoken. Sundar felt it in his chest, a question forming, not on paper, not in theory, but in spirit. "Why did you leave all of this behind, Leon?" Sundar asked finally. "You could have changed the future." Leon didn't answer immediately. He watched Eli, who had returned to his copper plate, etching a new line with slow, steady hands. "I didn't leave," Leon said at last. "I came home. The future you're talking about, that's this, him, this moment. After the accident, the doctor said he'd never wake up. They were sure, and I believed them. I stopped building rockets, started driving cars, kept my hands busy while my heart broke. Then one morning, he just opened his eyes, said nothing, just looked at me like he remembered everything I'd ever told him, but not in words, in ideas. He paused, took a breath, and then he started drawing." Maya whispered, "You think he finished it?" "I think he became it," Leon replied. "The model, the energy response system. He's building it from memory, but it's not even his memory. It's mine. It's ours. Somehow what we talked about, what I dreamed, it lived on inside him, like he held the blueprint in his bones." Sundar felt like he was standing at the edge of something vast, more than science, more than innovation. This wasn't just engineering, it was inheritance, the passing of fire. That night they stayed for dinner. Leon made cornbread and chili. Eli sat at the table but didn't eat. He just kept drawing. Sundar watched him, unsure what he was witnessing. A miracle, a mystery, or some quantum fusion of both. After they ate, Leon brought out a box from the garage. Inside were the original schematics. Yellowed paper, ink faded in places but still legible. The final prototype. The last model he had designed before NASA shut it all down. "If Eli's going to finish this," Leon said, "he'll need help, not from me, from you." Sundar hesitated. "What if we mess it up?" "Then mess it up beautifully," Leon said. "Because if we get even part of it right, it'll mean something." They began working together, the three of them, in that garage that smelled of oil and warm wood. Leon explained, Maya translated, Sundar restructured. Eli said nothing, but his hands moved like they had their own language. Together, they began to rebuild the engine, not just in form, but in philosophy. A system that responded to trust, that reacted to belief. But late one night, as the garage hummed with quiet purpose, Leon pulled Sundar aside. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, eyes heavy with the weight of another secret. Sundar braced himself. "What is it?" "The model. It was never meant for Earth." Sundar frowned. "What do you mean?" "This kind of engine, light, self-adjusting, intent-sensitive, it's too over-engineered for anything within atmosphere. It was designed for deep travel. Very deep." "How deep?" Leon's voice dropped to a whisper. "Interstellar." And suddenly, everything Sundar thought he knew about the project shifted. This wasn't about commercial drones or satellite pivots. It wasn't about improving orbit or making headlines. This was a key to a door the world didn't even know existed yet, and it had been hiding in a boy who'd only just learned to live again. The weight of discovery. The first signal came, quietly, like most dangers do. A ping on a secure server in Mountain View, flagged by a junior analyst who thought it was a systems error. Then another. Then 3 more. By the end of the day, Google's internal security team was sitting in a silent room, watching the same anomaly repeat itself over and over. A pattern like digital footsteps leading somewhere they weren't meant to go. Someone was watching, and not just watching, waiting. Sundar knew before anyone told him. Some instincts don't need confirmation. He'd felt the shift, like the air had changed, like the idea had grown too large to remain private. The moment you start shaping something that could change the balance of the future begins to stare back. He flew to Texas the next day. Leon was in the garage, tightening a bolt on the prototype housing while Eli hovered behind him, quietly etching notes into a sheet of aluminum foil. Sundar didn't even knock this time. He just stepped in and closed the door behind him. "We have a problem," he said. Leon wiped his hands. "How big?" "Imagine every government agency, every aerospace firm, and a few private players with more money than countries watching us. Now multiply that." Maya had arrived earlier that morning and already sensed the tension. She stopped soldering and sat down beside Eli, instinctively putting herself between him and whatever might come next. Leon didn't flinch. "Figures. Can't throw a match at the stars and expect no one to notice the smoke." "They don't understand it," Sundar said, "but they feel it. Something's rippling." "Then we're close," Leon whispered. But being close wasn't comfort. Being close meant exposure. And exposure meant risk. The kind of risk that didn't care about intentions or quiet genius. The kind that turned dreams into property and people into assets. That evening, Sundar's legal team called in a panic. A formal inquiry had been submitted to Alphabet's board. Shareholders were demanding clarity. Competitors were whispering about black box projects. Someone had leaked a version of Leon's original schematics. Only partial. Only pieces. But it was enough to make waves. And behind all of it, a name emerged. Navin Prasad, an old colleague of Leon's, once a rising star at NASA. Brilliant, politically, savvy, and absolutely ruthless. Leon hadn't spoken to him in over 2 decades. "Navin's still in the game?" Leon muttered when Sundar showed him the name. "He's not just in the game," Sundar replied. "He's trying to take the board." The past has a strange way of circling back when the stakes are highest. Leon looked away, jaw tense. He knows the theory, but he never believed in the model. He always said it was too emotional. "And now?" Maya asked. "Now?" Leon laughed bitterly. Now he sees a headline. The days that followed were tense. Legal teams scrambled. Engineers back in California debated whether to replicate the project in-house, afraid of missing out. The board pushed Sundar to bring everything into corporate control, but Sundar held the line, not just because of loyalty to Leon, but because something deeper had changed inside him. This wasn't just about innovation anymore. This was about who controlled the shape of the future and why. Back in Texas, the garage became more than a workshop. It became a sanctuary, a bunker, a final outpost where clarity still lived. Every day, the model grew closer to functional. Every night, Sundar stood under the sky with Leon, trying to make peace with the possibility that the moment they finished, someone might try to take it. Eli remained quiet through it all. But his drawings grew more precise, his eyes more focused, and one morning, without warning, he spoke. "The engine has to hear the pilot," he said. "Just that, no more." Maya froze. "Say that again," she whispered. But he didn't. He just walked over to the prototype and pointed to a tiny gap near the neural sensor array. Sundar bent down. "What is that?" Eli tapped the spot twice. Maya stared. That's a microphone input." Leon looked stunned. "I never added that." Eli pointed to his chest, then to the engine, then made a small motion with his hands like sound waves echoing. Maya was the first to understand. "He's saying the pilot doesn't just need to believe. The engine needs to hear that belief. It needs spoken intention." Sundar's mind reeled. It made no sense and perfect sense all at once. This was no longer a machine. This was a dialogue. The propulsion engine Leon dreamed of wasn't just about physics. It was about connection, presence, voice, a technology that could align with the human spirit in real time. Maya stepped back, heart pounding. If this works, it changes everything. Flight, navigation, communication, even consciousness. But outside, the world had stopped being patient. 2 black cars parked across the street the next morning. They didn't knock. They didn't enter. They just sat there. Leon saw them first, said nothing, then turned to Sundar and said, "We don't have much time." Sundar nodded. That night, they decided to move the prototype, not to a lab, not to a government facility, to a desert, a test site once used for small-scale aerospace experiments, somewhere they could launch without interference, somewhere they could speak to the stars. They had one chance, and maybe, just maybe, a miracle left. The ignition of everything. They arrived at the desert just after midnight. No cities for miles, no towers, no noise, only stars. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly thick with silence and constellations. Below, the dry, cracked earth waited like a blank canvas, asking nothing, promising everything. It was a strange feeling, knowing they were about to attempt something not even the world's largest labs had tried. Not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't. Because they didn't believe it was possible. But Sundar believed. Maya believed. And Eli. Eli knew. They had transported the prototype quietly, breaking it down into pieces, reassembling it under a makeshift dome of tarps and quiet prayers. It wasn't built to look impressive. It wasn't built to impress at all. It was built to work, and tonight it would. The test was simple in theory. Send the small prototype engine airborne on a tethered drone frame. Monitor its thrust vectoring, its response to commands, its biometric sync. What wasn't simple was the final step. Spoken intention. They didn't even know if it would respond. Maya stood by the terminal. Sundar adjusted the calibration one last time. Leon stood apart, watching. He hadn't touched the engine since Eli added the microphone port. He said it didn't feel like his anymore. It felt like something bigger, something borrowed from the universe, and Eli, he stood in front of it, no suit, no goggles, just a boy in a machine that shouldn't have existed. "Eli," Sundar said quietly, "you ready?" Eli nodded once, and then he did something no one expected. He placed both hands on the edge of the engine and whispered, "Go." The word was soft, almost gentle. Not a command, not a plea, just a release. And the engine listened. At first, nothing happened. Then a pulse, a soft vibration in the core, lights that flickered in response to the tremor of his voice. Maya's screen came alive. Data spiked. But not erratically. It danced. Like the system was following a rhythm only Eli could hear. Thrust alignment stabilizing, she said, voice shaking. Vector lock achieved. The drone lifted off the ground, no noise, no smoke, just lift. smooth and perfect. It hovered, then turned, responding not to the joystick, not to the code, but to Eli's words. "Higher," he said. It rose, left. It rotated, hovering above the desert, casting a shadow like a star that had dropped too low. And then, he looked up at the sky and whispered something they barely caught. "Take me there." And the engine surged. Leon shouted. Maya grabbed the kill switch. Sundar stepped forward. But it was too late. The drone shot upward, fast, almost vertical, faster than anything they'd prepared for. It didn't spin. It didn't fail. It climbed like it had waited its whole life to go home. For one long second, it vanished into the dark. And then, just before it broke range, it sent back one final message to the receiver. 3 words. "It remembers us." No one spoke. Maya stared at the screen, tears forming, hands trembling. Sundar sat down not because he wanted to, but because his knees suddenly remembered what awe felt like. And Leon walked into the open desert under the stars and laughed. Not the laugh of triumph or vindication. A laugh of relief. Of wonder, of love. They stayed at the site until morning. Not because they had more tests to run. There were no more tests, no more tweaks. Just a truth now. The engine had worked. And in doing so, it had shown them something none of them had dared hope for. That technology wasn't the enemy of humanity. It was its echo. And sometimes, if built with care and belief, it could carry pieces of us farther than we could ever imagine. Months later, Sundar stepped down as CEO, not in shame, not in defeat, in purpose. He started a foundation with Maya and Leon, one that supported forgotten minds, overlooked geniuses, and young inventors who saw machines not as tools, but as companions. Eli never spoke much after the launch. He didn't need to. He just kept building. Drawings of shapes no one had names for, designs that defied current science. And one word he kept writing in the margins over and over, like a quiet promise whispered to the stars. Listen. Leon passed away 3 years later, peacefully, in his sleep. They buried him under the Texas sky, just a mile from the launch site. On his tombstone were the words, "Forward is forward." And every year, on the day the engine launched, a small group would gather under that same sky, look up and wonder, not where the drone had gone, but what it had become. Because deep down they all knew, somewhere out there, far beyond orbit, a machine was still listening, and it remembered the boy who believed, the man who tried, and the moment the future took flight.